Good afternoon and welcome to the next in our series of webinars on the Solicitor's Qualifying Examination. We've noticed already from the comments below or from the video below that someone's already liked this broadcast before it even started. Well, thank you to that person. I suppose that puts the pressure on myself and Julie, and the pressure is particularly on me as I'm having a bit of a nightmare this morning. I don't want this to turn into a video of how not to do a webinar, but I have flaky Wi-Fi. I have some Christmas lights in the background that might suddenly go onto some sort of flashing mode to make it look like I'm in a nightclub. There's some building works going on outside my house across the road, which are quite noisy. And then I also have a 3-year-old who is hungry to get in here and making a lot of noise. So I've barricaded myself in here. I think Julie is in far more calmer setting in her house. But anyway, this webinar is one in which we know there's a lot of people interested in this topic, and we're going to be covering off what the SQE means for overseas qualified lawyers, overseas students, CILEx members, and also qualified lawyers such as barristers. We'll also be covering a little bit around exemptions and also some of the deadlines when people can no longer qualify through the current route, in particular around the qualifying lawyers transfer scheme, or the QLTS. As always with these webinars, these are potentially some quite complex areas. We'll put up the web address at the end, but we'd recommend, if this affects you, to, after this webinar, perhaps have a look at our website just to check the situation, your own personal situation, and what we say on our website there. But let's move on to the substance of things. And I suppose let's kick off and remind ourselves, as we usually do at the start of these, what's the new way to qualify. So as you can see from the slide there, you need to get a degree or equivalent, and that degree can be from overseas. You've got to take SQE 1, which tests practical legal knowledge, and then SQE 2, which tests both practical legal knowledge and skills. You have to get 2 years qualifying work experience, and Julie will say a bit about that later on, and you need to pass our character and suitability requirements. So that's what the SQE is. Now, as you hopefully know, we're introducing the new SQE to ensure consistency of standards. Before we dig into the detail, perhaps Julie, and I haven't really properly introduced you, Julie, but you know, you're the guru for the SQE in terms of leading on the development of that here at the SRA. Would it be worth setting out what are the key principles that are guiding our approach in this area for when it comes to sort of foreign qualified lawyers and overseas students?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Hello, everybody. So the key purpose of the SQE is to make sure that everybody who we admit as a solicitor of England and Wales is safe to practice. So it's a key method that we have to protect consumers, to make sure that the solicitors that they instruct are safe and know what they're doing. And one of the benefits of the SQE is that because it's the same exam that everybody takes, it gives a high level of consistency in the assessment. Everybody is demonstrably taking the same test, being assessed to the same standards, so it's fair for all candidates. And that means equally for people who have no previous qualification, perhaps who are qualifying through the domestic route in this country, they take the SQE, just as overseas qualified lawyers who wish to be admitted as solicitors of England and Wales will also take the SQE. Now, we welcome applications for admission as a solicitor from people who already have a qualification, legal professional qualification, either in this country or around the world. And so we're very pleased to welcome those applications. And what SQE enables people to do is not have to go back to the beginning, not have to go to university for 3 years and, you know, spend many years preparing to be admitted as a solicitor. It means that you can take the test, you can do whatever training is needed, and if you pass that, to us gives us a good indication that you are safe to practice. So that's the first thing, that SQE gives us a mechanism for overseas qualified lawyers to be admitted as solicitors of England and Wales, and to do so on a consistent basis. So we're assessing competence consistently, both for overseas qualified lawyers and people coming through the domestic route. Now, in developing our thinking around this, we've had to recognise that some people will already have started down the current route for overseas qualified lawyers, which is the Qualified Lawyers Transfer Scheme. And we don't want to leave people high and dry who are partway through that route. So we've looked at transition arrangements for people who are partway through, and we'll come on to have a look at that in a bit more detail. And finally, we also have a mechanism which we'll also look at later on in the webinar today, where somebody can demonstrate to us that they've already got home qualifications that are equivalent in content and standard. Then they may be able to get an exemption from the SQE. So we'll pick up on all of those three things and explain them in a little bit more detail as we move through today's webinar.
Well, I'll take you up on that, Julie. Let's jump into that detail now, and let's start off on one of the topics I know we get a lot of queries about. Overseas lawyers who are currently aiming to qualify here through the QLTS, the Qualified Lawyers Transfer Scheme. What's the deal for them? What do they have to do by when?
Yeah, so let's move on to the next slide, which is headed current QLTS candidates. So what we have is we have the notion of, if you like, a transitional cohort of individuals who are partway through training at the point at which the SQE regulations come into force. And that date is the 1st of September 2021. So what we have done is we've made arrangements for people who are partway through one of our existing routes on that date, so that they can either, at their choice, complete the route that they have started, or if they prefer, move on to the SQE, which by then will be available for them. So what do you need to do then to get into the transitional cohort through the QLTS? Well, the answer is, as set out in the slide, that if by the 1st of September 2021, you have already passed the multiple choice test in the QLTS, then you are in the transitional cohort. Go on to explain that a bit more in a moment. If you have either not yet attempted any part of the QLTS, or if you have attempted the multiple choice test but failed it, then you are not in the transitional cohort. And if you're in that position by the 1st of September 2021, you can obviously carry on and pursue a qualification as an English solicitor, but you have to do that through the SQE, and the QLTS will no longer be available for you. If you are in the transitional cohort, that is, you've passed the MCT, and I think the last sitting next year will be in July. If you've passed the MCT, then you've got an extended period to complete the QLTS. And even though SQE comes into force on the 1st of September 2021, you can complete QLTS in two ways, either by taking the OSCE, that's the QLTS Part 2, which will remain available until the 31st of August 2022, so for another 12 months. Or, alternatively, you can pass the SQE2. So you can do a little bit of a mix and match there. You will take the MCT for the QLTS, and then for a further 2 years, you can bank your MCT, and you've got 2 years then to come through the QLTS route by passing SQE2.
So hopefully people then should have, that gives people enough time, if you've started off on that QLTS route, to hopefully complete it. Otherwise, you're going to have to do the SQE. Shall we move on to the situation with exemptions, Julie?
Exemptions, there are a group of people in relation to the QLTS who are exempt from the QLTS Part 1, from the multiple choice test, and these are people who have passed the LPC. That group of people they do not have to take the MCT, but they do have to pass the OSCE. Now, for that group of people, they are not in the QLTS transitional cohort because they have not yet taken any step in the QLTS. So if all they are is they're exempt from QLTS Part 1 and they haven't yet even embarked on the OSCE, then they are not in the transitional cohort. And so for those people, they must complete the OSCE by the 31st of August 2021. So those people, if you're exempt from the QLTS at this stage, and you're planning to take the OSCE because you have an LPC, you must pass the OSCE by the 31st of August 2021, the end of next August.
Oh, okay, then that's great, Julie. And if you haven't started the QLTS, or you don't meet those deadlines that we just discussed there, and I know there's quite a few there, how will qualified lawyers qualify in the future?
So if you are not intending to, or don't fall into the transitional cohort for the QLTS, then you can qualify as an English solicitor through the SQE. And so all foreign lawyers can attempt the SQE. There's no requirement to be from particular jurisdictions or to have your jurisdiction recognised. What you have to be is a qualified lawyer, someone with a professional legal qualification and practice rights associated with that qualification. And the overall requirements are a little bit different for qualified lawyers than for people who are not qualified. So in the case of qualified lawyers, of course, you have to pass SQE 1 and 2, and you have to have meet our character and suitability requirements. But what's really important, looking back to Ben's the jigsaw puzzle that Ben presented at the beginning of this webinar, is that there is no work experience requirement. So you do not have to have work experience in order to qualify under the SQE. So that's what you need to do. You need to meet those particular requirements. And the other thing is that, as I mentioned at the start, you can apply for exemptions from the SQE, as indeed you can at the moment from the QLTS. And I think we'll pick that up a little bit later in more detail. Just to point out to people, where you are exempt from the SQE, there may be a language test, because you can see that if, for example, somebody has not had to have a full assessment of their skills because they're exempt perhaps from the OSCE part of the SQE, we have not had an opportunity to test that they can communicate effectively orally and in writing through the English language. So we do need to check that to make sure that somebody is safe to practice. And in that case, we would check it, but we would check it not before you're admitted, but before you're given your first practicing certificate. So there would be an English language test at that point.
Now, perhaps, Julie, we could move on to solicitors who've qualified close to home, and hopefully if you're Scottish or Northern Irish, you wouldn't need a language test because you'll be able to speak English. But what's the deal there? Is it the same situation for Scottish and Northern Irish lawyers?
So in principle, it's exactly the same situation. Everybody must in principle come through the SQE. For these groups of solicitors who are closer to home at the moment, we have quite wide-ranging exemptions for solicitors from Northern Ireland and Ireland. They pretty much come through automatically on an automatic recognition basis, and Scottish solicitors have some exemptions from the QLTS. That's because what we have done is a piece of work just to check that home qualifications are equivalent to, at the moment, the Qualified Lawyers Transfer Scheme, or where they're not, and they're not wholly in the case of Scottish solicitors, what bits of the QLTS people need to take so that we can check that they are competent across all the relevant areas. We need to do that piece of work so far as the SQE is concerned, and that piece of work that we will be picking up and taking forward with the law societies in Scotland, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland next year. So that's a piece of work that will be undertaken. So watch this space. Once that's completed, we will put the information out on our website.
And am I right in thinking the same is true for Ireland as well? Because obviously there's similarities in terms of Irish lawyers and the law there.
That's right. So it applies to that piece of work will apply to solicitors of the Republic of Ireland, of Northern Ireland and Scottish solicitors.
Thank you, Julie. So far we've talked about lawyers who've qualified overseas, but what about someone who lives overseas but actually isn't a lawyer? We know there are lots of people who might be interested in qualifying as a solicitor here. What do they have to do?
So overseas students and trainees can also attempt the SQE, so they can also qualify as a solicitor of England and Wales through the SQE. And some of these people may be located outside England and Wales and want to qualify from England and Wales. Some of these people may be taking courses at English universities. So we know that quite a lot of people come over to take master's courses at English universities, and the master's courses themselves may contribute to their knowledge of English and Welsh law that may help them prepare for the SQE. They may be on completely different topics, specialist areas that we're not necessarily assessing it through the SQE, but people may wish, while they happen to be in this country, they may think to themselves, well, this is a good opportunity for me to pick up a qualification as an English and Welsh solicitor. So those are the sorts of groups who at the moment very often will come through the QLTS, and we expect in future will want to apply through the SQE. So for this group of students and candidates, all the 4 elements of the jigsaw puzzle that we presented at the start will apply. So you have to demonstrate that you've got a degree. You do have to do qualifying work experience, but actually that can be obtained abroad. The thing to bear in mind, though, is that it must be signed off by a compliance officer for legal practice or another solicitor of England and Wales. So it must be signed off by somebody who we regulate, so we can be sure that that work experience has happened. So all the 4 elements, so you must pass SQE 1 and 2, you must pass the character and suitability test, you must get your 2 years qualifying work experience, and you must have a degree or equivalent qualification or experience. And the thing to bear in mind, and this applies of equal relevance for people who are qualified abroad or who are not yet qualified abroad, but SQE1 will be available to sit internationally. So I think that's quite important for people to know, that you potentially will be able to attempt SQE1 without needing to travel to England and Wales. And similarly, SQE2 written assessments, and 12 out of the 16 assessments in SQE2 are written assessments, they will also be available internationally. The bit that at the start will only be available in England and Wales will be the oral assessments, where, because they're oral and we need to make sure and take care that they're properly standardised and consistent and fair to everybody, they're available in limited testing centres in England and Wales. But once we have got the oral assessments up and running and we're used to delivering them, we will look at whether they can also be available internationally as well, but they won't be from the word go.
And I suppose that obviously a key thing there will be what the demand is. But I suppose, Julie, do we have any idea of what countries that you talked about SQE1 and parts of SQE2 can be assessed abroad? Do we have any idea what countries that will cover? Will it be limited, or will it be quite a large number of countries?
Well, the way that works is that we work with Pearson VUE, a big well-known company that has a national and international network of testing centres. So the way that it will work is that once you have decided that you want to register for the SQE, you put in and you want to book a particular assessment, you book in where you are and ask the system to find you, say, the nearest 3 testing centres, and you know that will pick up where they are. So you'll be able to find where that's available. It is a wide-ranging network, but obviously the exact availability depends a little bit on demand and how full they are. But that's the way that the system works.
And I imagine it'll be really interesting, won't it, once the SQE is established over a few years, to see the range of countries where people are actually wanting to qualify through that. Okay, that's really useful. Let's move on to another area where I know we get a lot of queries, and we have covered off before in some other webinars, but I think it's worth revisiting again, and that's people closer to home who have qualified through who are CILEx members, qualified through that route.
Yes, so CILEx members at the moment qualify through the LPC route. So they have to take the LPC. They don't have to do a training contract because they get an exemption from that, because of course they will have spent lots of time in practice getting their CILEx qualifications. So the first question that we pick up on the slide is this question about being in the transitional cohort. And of course, if you have accepted an offer on the LPC route, or started the LPC or completed the LPC before the 1st of September 2021, then you can complete that and you can qualify under the existing route. So you can take the LPC, and then if you've got all the other current requirements like carriage and suitability in place, and you've got your CILEx experience, so you don't need to do a training contract, then you can qualify through taking the LPC. But if you're not in that position, you haven't yet started the LPC, or you don't want to go down that route, then you need to effectively meet the requirements that we've set out in the jigsaw puzzle. So you do have to have a degree or equivalent qualification. We will recognise CILEx level 6 qualification as equivalent to a degree, so that shouldn't be a problem to anybody. CILEx work experience again is likely to count, so that will ticks off the requirement for 2 years qualifying work experience. Then you have to pass SQE 1 and 2, and you have to meet our carriage and suitability test. So that's broadly the arrangement in relation to CILEx members.
And I suppose obviously CILEx members have gone through a rigorous training process, but another sort of category of people who have gone through rigorous legal training are barristers. Are there similar arrangements in place for them? What's the deal with barristers?
So similarly, yes, looking at the next slide about barristers, the first thing is to say is that if we are looking at barristers as qualified lawyers, then they need to have completed pupillage and have their practice rights. So that's the first thing. If they're not in that group, then of course they can still attempt SQE, but they have to have they have to demonstrate work experience and so on. So they don't get that exemption from work experience. Barristers will need to pass SQE 1 and 2, and subject to the exemptions, and of course that applies to CILEx members as well, and we'll come on to talk about exemptions in a moment. And they'll need to pass the character and suitability test. And again, one of the things that is quite interesting in relation to barrister training, which of course is itself changing at the moment, is the extent to which what you can do as a barrister is combine barrister training and SQE training, so that some of the training that you are doing as a barrister on the BPTC, particularly around litigation and advocacy, is going to overlap with the SQE. So it may be that what you can do is go and take some SQE top-up training, which helps you then more easily qualify, pick up the SQE qualification, perhaps as well as the barrister qualification. So again, you're keeping all your options open.
Thanks, Julie. And we've already sort of flirted with the topic of exemptions already, and you've sort of mentioned that throughout your different sort of categories of people. But should we just move on to exemptions now? I suppose, will everyone have to take all of the SQE, and what type of circumstances might you not have to?
Yeah. So it's worth just repeating why we have this system of exemptions for qualified lawyers, and what we want to do as a regulator is be proportionate in our requirements. Of course, we must be absolutely careful to make sure that everybody that we admit as a solicitor is safe to practice. But what we also want to recognise is that people may have a professional legal qualification, and in the course of getting that professional legal qualification, they have got qualifications which are equivalent in content and standard to what we assess through the SQE. And in order to be proportionate, it should not be necessary, where we can establish that, to reassess people on all of that material. So we have this provision that qualified lawyers, and to be clear about that, that is lawyers with practice rights. So it does mean barristers who have their practice rights. It does mean CILEx members who have full practice rights can also apply for exemptions. They are in the position, as well as overseas qualified lawyers, to say to us, look, I've got these qualifications, and actually I think that means I should have an exemption from the SQE. So that's the thinking behind it. And as the slide says, what anybody who's applying for an exemption needs to demonstrate to us is that their qualifications and/or experience are equivalent in content and standard to the SQE. Now, it's quite a tough thing to do. It's quite a high level that you need to demonstrate to us that your existing qualifications are absolutely equivalent. And what we say is that your qualifications and experience must map against either the whole of SQE1, which is itself divided into 2 papers. So, we will look at your qualifications and all of, for the whole of the curriculum of SQE paper 1. Yes, you have got exemptions that map, or you've got a home qualification experience that covers the whole of that. If you've only got qualifications and experience that cover part of that, then you can't get an exemption from any of it. So you can't get an exemption from particular questions in the paper, and the same for SQE2. And the reasoning behind that is that if all of a sudden you get exemptions, just 20 questions here or there, it doesn't make the assessment really very fair or in assessment terms reliable, and therefore it doesn't work very well. So it's not, you can't get partial exemptions from a paper. You have to demonstrate to us that your qualifications cover the whole of either SQE1 paper 1, SQE1 paper 2, or SQE2. So we will be launching probably in about March the application process for people who wish to apply for exemptions. And you will have to demonstrate to us and give us all the evidence that you have that says, I think I should have an exemption from the SQE because I've got these home qualifications. You don't need to apply for an exemption, and actually you can see a very good reason why you might not want to. If you are the world's best, let us say, litigator or the world's best business lawyer, actually, you give yourself a head start by taking all those questions because you're more likely to pass those questions, and that will stand you in good stead in terms of passing the SQE overall. So actually, there's a good reason why you might not want to. But nevertheless, in order to be, as I say, a proportionate regulator and not insist on everybody, being reassessed where they can very, clearly demonstrate to us that they've got an equivalent qualification already, there is this opportunity just for qualified lawyers to apply to us for an exemption.
So yeah, just to re-emphasise, that's the key point, isn't it? If we're talking about exemptions, it's only qualified lawyers where this is relevant to. Just to check in on that, will CILEx members, is there potential for them? Do they fall under that category to get exemptions?
That's right. So at the moment, and historically, and again, I think this is something that may be changing, but historically, CILEx members have been able to get membership of CILEx, and then there was an extra process for them to get full practice rights. And because our definition of a qualified lawyer means somebody who has practice rights, it's CILEx members with full practice rights that are eligible to come to us for in relation to exemptions. If you're just a CILEx member and you haven't got your full practice rights, then in these terms you count as just an ordinary candidate for the SQE, and you do need to take the whole of SQE 1 and 2.
Thank you, Julie. And I think that probably brings us to the end of that canter through qualified lawyers and all overseas lawyers, barristers, CILEx members. Hopefully people have found something of use in there, and that hopefully that's been helpful. However, I'd further give a shout out to go to the SRA website, have a look on there, go to our Career in Law Facebook page, which is targeted at aspiring solicitors, and we put regular updates on there. But if actually you're not sure, you can ask questions through a variety of means, including Career in Law Facebook. You can put comments below on this YouTube broadcast, and we'll try and pick them up. I can't see any questions as of yet. So but if you put one there, we'll try to get back to you, because we realise everyone's circumstances may be different, and you may just want to check. But hopefully that's been helpful. Thank you, Julie, for running through that. Thank you to my Wi-Fi for staying alive, my light's not flashing, the builder being quiet, and my 3-year-old is now outside the window just there, smiling and waving at me. So he's done. Congratulations to him as well for staying out of this room. But otherwise, thank you very much. And I suppose a final shout out to, as well as this webinar, in the next week or so, we'll be publishing an updated webinar on the transitional arrangements more broadly. So look out for that. But otherwise, thank you very much and have a good Christmas when we get there.